Today's episode is all about storytelling, but it's not the once upon a time there was kind of story, but rather stories that are told within the business context. So, what do I mean by that? Well, to answer that question, I invited our senior communication coach, Andrea Brody, to come on the podcast and talk about the workshop that she created and delivers called Inspiring Through Storytelling. She has some great stories to share about its impact on business and perhaps will inspire you to take it as well. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Karin Reed. I'm a four-time author, Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, and communication expert on helping people to own the room, whether it be a physical one or a virtual one. Welcome to Speaker Dynamics. Andrea, I am so excited to talk to you about this because, we've worked together a long time. I think I've known you at least 30 years, and we worked in TV news together. And one of the things that I always appreciated about you and your skill set was your storytelling. I always felt like you were just amazing in that space. And I love that you are doing it now, working through Speaker Dynamics, which we've been working together here for a long time. But if you can just kind of start us off with an understanding of what is the Inspiring Through Storytelling workshop all about? Like, give me a brief synopsis and give our listeners and viewers a brief synopsis.
Sure. I'm just having a moment first because I think this is the first time we've felt like we were co-anchoring.
I know, that's so true. Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
In the TV news tech, we're in double box right now. And I'm like, wow.
This is what it would have been like. That's so, now, I don't know. Did we ever co-anchor?
No, but I think that we would have been in this situation many times where you were tossing to me, out in the field or something. So it's great.
So
and that's a good segue to my favorite part of when I was on air for many stations as an anchor or a reporter was being a reporter, because that generally gave me a lot of freedom to tell stories. And I never liked to tell the hard news. I'm here at the scene. I mean, sometimes yes, but what I really preferred was the second story. So if the first story was about the situation, maybe, unfortunately, a traffic accident or something like that, I would preferred to talk about the second story, which the people involved, the people affected by whatever we were covering. And that's what led me to this workshop, which is so much fun because, I'm getting paid. I know how to tell a story, but the average person doesn't. Yeah. So in this workshop, we help them find their story, then craft it, and then we work on telling the story with power so that they can find connection with those around them.
Yeah, I love that. And I also will say that the first story that you're talking about, where it's just like just the facts, I feel like that's the one that often companies and corporations tend to tell easily because it's all about the features, and they miss that second story, which is where it's human centric, whether it's about their customer or their leadership style or their team. So I love that you put this together, and let's just help people understand the basics of why being able to tell a story is important for business people. What would you say to them?
I think I would present the science to them and the research.
Okay.
So my favorite bit of research is two researchers surveyed people after they listened to a presentation, and they asked them to recall some of the facts of the presentation. Only 5% of those polled could come up with anything. However, when they asked them, how many of you remember the story that was told in the presentation, it was 63%.
So they remembered the story and not the stat that, probably the person putting together the piece thought was so critical and everybody would love. Well, they forgot that.
And actually the bulk of the presentation filled with stats. They couldn't come up with any, but they still could circle back on the connecting story that someone told. And I as soon as I heard that, I'm like, mic drop. This validates everything I've always believed, that if you can make a person feel, you can also help them remember.
Absolutely. And you did a ton of research. This is obviously you have a skill set of being a good storyteller, but you also went to all different sources to understand, okay, what makes for a good story? Like, how can people do this with some data to back it up? Can you tell me a little bit, tell our folks a little bit about what you discovered about the science of storytelling?
So it's focusing just on the science. And I actually just thought about this today. For centuries, from the beginning of time, the beginning of humanity, we've been telling stories. There's evidence that they'd sit around campfires and caves and tell stories. And what I realized is storytelling is the original virtual reality.
Mm,
And let me tell you what I mean by that.
okay.
When you're in virtual reality, you're transported to another universe where you see the things there, you feel the experience, your body reacts. Researchers have shown that all of those things happen when we listen to a story. So, for example, it's a mind, body, and soul phenomenon in the brain. If we're hearing a story where storyteller is describing in good detail, seeing something or hearing something, if that person listening to the story is wired up, to see what part of the brains are firing, the exact same parts of the brain light up as if they were listening and hearing these things for themselves, not through vicariously through another person. The same is true in the motor cortex. Have you ever come out of a movie, like an action movie, and you're like all revved up and
you're all jacked up, right? On adrenaline. Yeah.
It's not your fault. The brain actually feels like it was fighting the sword fight that the main actor was fighting as well. So you come out almost like, wow, I've just been through battle. And the same thing, they wire these people listening to stories and they discover the brain is reacting completely. And then there's some things that actually course through us, chemicals that are released. Dopamine, that feel good chemical that helps you remember things, is activated. Oxytocin, which helps us, with emotions and empathy. All of those things flood the system as we listen to a story. And think about the power of that. If you in the business world are making that kind of connection to the person that you're trying to pitch or that you're trying to, recruit, the power of that is really, really mind blowing, because there's even one other element called the brain sync effect or neural coupling, where they show that the pattern of the storyteller's brain and the pattern of the listener's brain lock. And it's almost as if they are feeling what you're feeling. So there's a great potential. And I found that I always knew it worked. I never knew why. And I was like, oh, okay, now that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way when I was writing my books with Dr. Allen, because I'd be like, yeah, and this is what happens in meetings. He'd be like, well, that's because the science shows us that this is going on. I'm like, oh, I love that I now know the reason why for the things that I just anecdotally observe. So that's super cool. Question though, are all stories created equal? And can any story work for any business purpose?
No, definitely not. And it was really cool because for example, I've been telling this one story about a trip my girlfriends and I took in high school to Disney World, and we ended up in the Haunted Mansion as it was closing. And it's this hilarious story. It's my favorite story. It's the story I tell. I learned it's not actually a story.
Oh,
it's a romp or an anecdote, because a true story makes you have some kind of transformation, or enables the audience also to experience that transformation. My Haunted Mansion story is just fun. So what you want to do when you craft a story is think about how your world has changed because of this impactful moment that the story is kind of arcing toward. So there are different kinds of stories that you can use also in business, depending on who your audience is. And I know that's a favorite of Speaker Dynamics, is really identifying your audience. So for example, you can tell a value story about why your company is so important and makes a difference in the world. You can tell the founder story about why you are fueling such an important company because of your passion and your morals and everything that aligns to the people you're trying to pitch. You can tell a product story, which talks about specifically the value of a product as opposed to the overall value of your company. Or you can tell a customer story, where you talk about the customer satisfaction or how their world has changed since using your product. So once you identify your audience, you can then pick which story aligns best with your goal. And I thought that was really interesting to see that sort of put into columns, and it totally makes sense.
yeah. And I would imagine that in the workshop you do some of that, but I also imagine in the workshop you have people who say, hey, Andrea, I can't be a storyteller. I'm not good at telling stories. What do you say to them?
Well, first I remind them of that fact. It's like, great, you're not good as storytellers, but we are all terrible at making people remember facts. So let's go, let's work on this. And it is a simple formula. It's really a 3-step formula to build a story. And my favorite thing about the workshop is watching the people who think I am a terrible storyteller realize, like, wait a second, I can actually do this. And not only that, I have a gazillion stories I can tell. I thought I had nothing to talk about. So I think that for those people, it takes, it's more I think, and I know you'll relate to this. They say, I only have 5 minutes. I can't tell a story. I'm not going to waste my entire allotted time telling a story. And again, you go back to that fact that you're going to tell 5 minutes of facts and not move the needle at all. Stories sell. Whether you're selling your investment, your product, your business, stories sell. And I think that is the key, trying to convince people to really embrace this idea. But once they go through the workshop and they hear their peers around the table begin to tell the stories and they realize, like, wait a second, I just had a real visceral reaction, then they become more convinced themselves.
Totally agree with you. And that happens for a lot of the techniques that we teach overall, right? Where they're like, oh, this is just superfluous. They just want to know the facts. Well, you think that, but as you said, they're not going to remember them. How can you make an idea stickier in their brains? And story is a tried and true method. So, how can someone find stories in their everyday life?
Oh, so that's another thing. So people are like, listen, I've never done anything big. I've never done anything great. I don't have any stories. That is, you got to push that aside right away, because it's really not the big moments of life that hold the stories that are relatable. And that's the key. It's stories around your dining room table with your family. It's stories with friends, or, in that one moment of pure frustration in front of your computer, when you're looking down the barrel of your business future and realize, oh no, I'm in trouble. Those are the stories that are smaller, but everyone can feel, because again, not everyone has climbed Mount Everest. I can tell a great story of how I planned to climb it. I trained to climb it. I climbed it, and oh boy, I'm great. That's a boring story. I mean, it could be interesting, but in general, there's no real power there other than a good romp or anecdote. The best stories are those small ones. So what we do is a little exercise to get things going. It's first, last, best, worst. So let's say you're starting a company. You want to talk about your first sale, your last sale, your best sale, your worst sale. And just making your brain think about some of those moments often triggers a story, especially your best story, your best sale or your worst sale, or sometimes even the first. Yeah. So that exercise is super easy to do across anything you're trying to come up with. If you're trying to make a toast at a wedding, and you want to think about, well, the first time I met the bride, the last time we were together, the best time the bride and I had, when we were together, and maybe even our worst experience, that we shared. All of those can trigger some thoughts that might spark a story.
Yeah, I love that. And I know you've gotten such great feedback from your participants on the workshop that you do. And is there any moment that stands out to you that was kind of like maybe an aha moment for a participant? Something where you're like, they get it. Like something that stands out to you that, where you thought, okay, I'm making a difference here. I've had an impact. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I'm going to use my own trick and go back to my last workshop.
Okay.
And there was an executive there who just wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid. And through part of the workshop, we do a lot of sharing. And there were a lot of people there. I think there were like close to 30 people, which is a big group.
That is.
And I asked him, he said, I'm struggling. I said, well, what are you struggling? I don't have any stories. Well, let's talk about your most memorable time with this organization. He said, well, it was this one convention that we went to. Well, what happened during the convention? I don't know. I can't remember anything. I've been going on and on and on and on. And then finally, a woman to his right was like, I was with you at that convention. Do you remember the police escort we got to the stadium where we were all going to have our big, conference? He's like, Oh yeah. And you could literally see the light go off. And I tried to prod him more and he's like, no, got it. I got it. I got it. I got it. And he just furiously began to write. And then when he shared his story, it was so gratifying because
Oh.
you could see it completely turned in an instant. The second he realized, wait a second, this isn't so daunting. And he freed himself to the exercise. It was really fun. And everyone in the room responded. And it was a great story. And we were all like nodding our heads along with him as he told it. It was just one of those moments.
Yeah, and you're pointing to something that I do love whenever I'm doing training is just how, you know, I have something to share, you have something to share in terms of best practices and technique, but there's so much wisdom typically in the room with us, and whenever they hear from their peers, they can put it more into like a real life framework for themselves, and it does help to cement the key learnings, but put it into a context where they're like, oh, yeah, I guess that is what you're talking about, and it makes it, as mentioned, much more relatable. I love that. So, for you, has been the most fun part of delivering this workshop? What do you like most about it?
I think it is hearing those stories. So we spend 3/4 or even longer learning how to craft a story once we have gone through the exercise of discovering the stories, and we feed off of each other, break up in groups and prod, I need more of those visuals. We talked about a little while ago, the science. Well, in order to see and hear, you have to include those details in your story.
Yeah.
So we work together to bounce off ideas to enhance that, to really create a movie in the mind. And what's really cool is you hear the beginnings of the stories at the beginning of the session. And then at the end, when you've added those details and perhaps made it a story where it comes full circle and has that transformative moment, and everybody in the room has been on this journey and they're like, wow, that's a good story. Yeah, it's really, I sit there with this goofy smile on my face the whole time when I hear them put all of those little elements in place and I can see everything clicking. It's really, really rewarding and satisfying.
Yeah, I think it's so. I mean, I know we both share the same sort of feeling that, yeah, like we can tell good stories. We can deliver a good presentation, but I know I get so much more joy helping others gain confidence in that skill than me doing it myself. And I would imagine you feel the same.
Absolutely. It's just so fun. It's actually fun,
Yeah.
to hear someone come from, I can't do it, to have every person in their room like hushed by the story they're telling, in some cases even moved. And then the last one I did, one of the non-believers, that she was actually, thinking about not continuing with the organization. And she rediscovered so many of the stories that reminded her how much value the organization had to her, that she not only re-engaged, but she upped her commitment. So it's a good process it's fun for me. And I think it's fun for the people going through it because it's introspective. It's almost like journaling in some ways.
Yeah.
And that's very valuable as well.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about who this would be most appropriate for this storytelling workshop. Do you have thoughts on that?
Everyone.
I know. But I imagine like I know typically we end up working with a lot of senior leaders, but is like what size wise, like what
I feel like, people anyone who's trying to convince someone of something, the story can be so powerful. I really love it for people trying to get investors.
Yeah.
I think it's a great tool for them because there's so many. We talked about, you could tell the founder story, which will help convince like why your company, or the product story, which help convince them, oh my gosh, you really came up with something cool. So investors are great. We definitely have people that, I have personal clients, private clients that want a promotion. And it's really important that they be able to tell in real terms how they're contributed, and not just in a detailed, here are my numbers, but in a way that they affected their coworkers or, their entire, the brand. So those are really my favorite story. It was, and the perfect illustration, believe it or not, was I was coaching athletes who were preparing for the NFL Combine.
Okay.
And I don't know do we have time for a quick
Yeah,
story?
we absolutely do. Yeah.
Okay.
Tell the story, Andrea.
So, and I think this illustrates how like it works for anyone, because this is a linebacker coming out of college, obviously an elite athlete. He's invited to the combine. For those who don't know, the NFL combine is where all of the teams with the coaches and the general managers come to one place and get a chance over several days to look at the talent just graduating or just declaring for the NFL, to get a good feel of who's going to be the best fit for their team and they maybe want to draft. So it is high stakes for everybody. So this one guy was a linebacker, a captain of the defense, basically, and very gentle, very laid back personality. And he said, I'm having the hardest time convincing general managers that I'm a good leader, because they see this quiet guy and they're not inspired.
Yeah.
And so we went through it and we said, okay, what is the moment on the field that, you remember that really, so he described this moment where it was fourth quarter, last play of the game. His defense needed a stop. They were on basically in the red zone. So they were protecting their end zone. And a freshman who was playing turned around and looked at him right before the play was about to start. And he looked like a deer in the headlights. His eyes were as big as saucers. He could sense the fear. And with a couple of hand signals, he indicated to this freshman, here's where the play is going to go. Here's where you need to be positioned. You got this. Sure enough, play goes right at that freshman. The freshman makes the game-saving tackle. And my client describes how he has never been more elated in his life. He'd never been so happy to rush to another player and celebrate him. And it was one of his greatest moments in the field. That's his story. So in that one story, what have you told a coach listening to you? Yeah. You know the playbook. The others trust you because they're looking to you. You're eager to share, and your love of the game transcends your personal glory. There's so many things that a simple story can tell. And that would seem to be a unique usage case of a story.
Yeah.
An NFL player, who's just trying. But imagine how he stood out when player after player came and sat in that same chair and just said, I love the game. My passion is football. I'm a natural leader.
Yes, absolutely. I was thinking, and that's, I'm sure, the default that people take, and, if you want to stand out, a story is a great way to stand out. And I also think about the leaders that we work with and how valuable it is for them to use a story to inspire their organization, especially if you've got some rough seas ahead, this is a time where you can help them to be inspired to, stick with us. We're going to make it through this together by telling a story and helping people to get all rolling, in sequence and moving towards the end goal. So I think I have gotten many requests in the past. We didn't have something to fit into the corporate storytelling, category. I'm so thankful to you for creating this and giving your expertise that you've had for decades and sharing it with our clients and customers. And thank you for being here today. It's been really fun to be in the double box with you.
Back.
Okay. And incidentally, Andrea is our senior communication coach, and she is the master of storytelling. And if you are interested in learning more about how you can have this sort of workshop offered, please reach out to us at speakerdynamics.com. We'd love to talk to you about it and explain more. We don't want to steal your thunder entirely, Andrea, but I do know the curriculum that you deliver is awesome. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. And I know at Speaker Dynamics, we are very excited to hear all of your stories, because it definitely energizes us. And as we talked about, it's one of the great joys of the culmination of our careers, moving through being a storyteller full time to helping people find their stories. And there's nothing more gratifying.
So I don't know about you, but whenever I heard Andrea say that she had a story about the haunted mansion at Disney, it took everything I had to not be like, so tell me the story. So for today's bonus content, for this episode's bonus content, she actually tells that haunted mansion story to comedic effect. So if you want to hear it for yourself, I would encourage you to go to speakerdynamics.com/bonus bonus content. Once again, it's speakerdynamics.com/bonus content to hear the Haunted Mansion story, but also to learn why it's actually not a story in her mind. It's actually more of a romp. So if you want to know what that distinction is, and also just want to be entertained by something that a couple of teenage girls did, I would encourage you to check it out. I also wanted to give all of you a heads up. Speaker Dynamics Own the Room podcast is taking a summer vacation. This is the last episode that you'll hear from me for just a couple of months. I just need to get some other things done. I'm also grabbing a lot of intel through a lot of travel commitments for clients that are creating all sorts of ideas in my mind for podcast episodes for this fall. I also have several guests that I've already spoken with who will be sharing with you their expertise in the fall. So have some great podcast episodes lined up, but you won't be able to hear them until September. So forgive me for the break. Lots of balls in the air that I'm trying to juggle. But I do, before I take my summer vacation, I wanted just to express my absolute gratitude for you taking the time to listen to these episodes, to watch these episodes, and for entrusting with me with your time, which I know time is short. So truly, truly appreciate it. And we'll see you in a couple months, everybody. Thanks so much.